Good afternoon. Let's consider that some of the audience are still enjoying lunch, and let's start and have them join us later. I think that we need to establish the following schedule: 10 minutes for each presentation, and then each presentation will be followed by a brief discussion. My name is Alexey Lapushkin. My name is Alexey Lapushkin, and I'm the Secretary of the Federal Council of the Party of Business. About a year ago, we initiated the setting up of an international conservative club. It's the third event that we participate in. We also organized a conference in Milan. In cooperation with our colleagues from Italy. And so I would like to start this third event by stating that Russia is a large country that is home to more than 190 ethnicities who have their own languages and cultures that belong to various religions, but nevertheless they form in a single national entity, which is known as the multi-ethnic Russian people. And the large territory disallow us from adopting the ideas of globalism and multiculturalism, which in our view are on the brink of being unhuman. We believe that ethnic groups should preserve their ethnic identities, and European cultural achievements are also, we regard them as part of our culture and identity. We prepared about a year ago a report entitled Back to the Future, and at that time we were setting up the International Conservative Club. We believe that that the setting up of such a club was a badly needed thing to do. It provided us with a forum for the sound, for the healthy forces to join together to counter the trends that we observe in the international politics. We would like to I would like to turn it over to Eliseo Bertolazzi, who is the co-founder of the Veneto Russia Union. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. I'm really glad to be here in Moscow attending this forum, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. About a month ago in Italy, we had an election. And this is what I'm going to talk about: Italian election and how the Conservative Front made an advance there. But at the beginning, I would like to say a couple of words about the diplomatic war against Russia. On my personal behalf, and on behalf of the Veneto Russia Association, and on behalf of the Veneto region, Acciana Santana, he was not able to come here. I would like to express a great degree of solidarity with the people and the government of the Russian Federation, and all the members of Veneto Russia Association are strongly against the shameful accusatory campaign that was unleashed by Great Britain, the United States, and other members of the alliance against Russia, which is a clear provocation, which is not grounded on any evidence. We separate ourselves from the decisions of the Italian government, which sent home 2 Russian diplomats. And that government does not represent us. And I'm even sure that our government does not even represent the Italian people. I really believe that the new government will finally be able to change the political course and re-establish the sovereignty of Italy and free itself of whole chain of Italian governments from the dictate of the North Atlantic Union. And we sent notes to this effect to the Russian officials. And right now, I would like to proceed to my presentation per se. I think that the identity and sovereignty are mutually complementary things, and they cannot be separated. An identity without a sovereignty would be an empty shell, and we should not separate the two things. Moreover, in order for us to express ourselves, we need freedom. Which means to be sovereign means to be free, which in turn means to make decisions on your own politics, or make your own political decisions. And the preservation of identity for the people requires the people to freely make decisions on its own social matters. And defending our identity and protesting against its violation manifest themselves when a society is threatened by dissociation. And in Italy, the loss of our sovereignty manifests itself in a lot of migrants who arrived on our shores to change the ethnic composition of our people. In other words, we are dealing with an attempt. We need to step up our fight, our struggle to preserve the unity of our people, which can be achieved through election. And as was mentioned, on the 4th of March, we had an election of the government. The result of the popular ballot showed that none of the political parties has reached the threshold of 40% in order to rule the country. We will have to establish a coalition, the right central coalition led by the party, the Northern League, the party that no one has established the threshold yet, but behind the scenes there is a different game going on, and we have two real rivals. The first being the so-called pro-European forces, which means forces defending the interests of Brussels, Paris, and other European capitals, which exert pressure on the left, which include leftist parties, which had a great influence on the politics through the domination of the mass media, and the second force being the sovereign Eurosceptic right-wing forces that want to bring the interests of the nation back into the focus of politics in order to prevent the final destruction of the production capacity of Italy as a country. The pro-European forces are involved in a dialogue that requires the destruction of European identity and culture. Pro-European forces express the global interests, the interests of global players that want to do away with the cultural identity of new peoples and create a new world that would be in line with the concept of the open society, multicultural and American-centric. These ideas are mortally dangerous to the survival of the European nations, and they are in line with the so-called political liberalism, and therefore they are supported and spread not by the entire chorus of official media, but also by the cultural centers, universities, films, and other propaganda machines of the European Union. When new generations in the future, and please believe me, this future is around the corner, is very near, when they start regretting the loss of cultural identity left to them by their ancestors, they will know who they need to thank. All this will happen unless there is a movement toward waking up, toward people responding and becoming conscious who do not want to sacrifice their history on the altar of globalism. As far as Italy goes, I am sure that the Eurosceptical and conservative forces, the results of the public ballot, public voting show that Italians demand that the political direction be changed as compared to the previous government, and the Italians are tired of the austerity policies, and Europe keeps asking us for more austerity. We are tired of the degradation and crime in Italian countries driven by uncontrolled migration. If the next Italian government is to reflect this demand, this wish of the people, it should bravely distance itself from the past policies that always put Italy into the role of the executor of the orders coming from Brussels or Washington. This is a true anti-Italian policy. The most important loss is the loss of national interest, and one of the more salient examples that of what I talked about in the beginning, and also the economic sanctions against Russia. They are going to cause a true boomerang effect and causing great damage to the Italian exports to Russia. Since 2014, we have lost 3 million euros. We've been losing 3 billion euros per year. You can imagine how great these losses are. In conclusion, the restoration of our sovereignty and means taking our future in our own hands. We want to feel the sons of our forefathers, not only biologically, but also culturally. We want to live in the present on the strong foundation built by our ancestors and look into the future while being fully aware of our roots and history. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to turn it over to Emeric Choprat, a European MP, Member of Parliament, Member of Europarlament, and Professor of Geopolitics.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very glad to be with you to discuss about these very important issues: sovereignty, identity, protectionism. The question is to know if we can remain ourselves in the globalization process. Globalization is not a new phenomenon. In history, there have been many stages of globalization. The historian of the long term, Fernand Braudel, a French historian, spoke about system world. He explained what Mediterranean system world was. There is an imperial power at the root of every globalization. It was the case of Rome, Genghis Khan in Central Asia, England in the 19th century, and the United States since 1945. Every globalization is based on a technical or a scientific advantage. The West was able to dominate China due to its firepower. Before, the Central Asian empires terrorized the West because they were the civilization of horse, a more fluid, efficient, and even territorial civilization. There is so much to learn about the world's history. It shows us that self-sufficiency is always defeated by the opening. Sparta was defeated by Athens. I do not think that North Korea could win the battle for its independence by getting isolated. Why? Because one of the key determinants of history is scientific progress. The scientific and technical advantage gives an asset in terms of power. Any system allowing the circulation of ID is more efficient than any closed system due to the IDs being captured in order to be improved. Let us not forget that it is the brain drain which allowed the United States to rise as the world leader. The power of the United States primarily comes from their scientific and technical domination, with an addition, a creativity served by a strong capacity to raise capital. For me, leaders who completely close their country by fear of seeing it dominated by the United States or any other imperial power are in the wrong track. Certainly, their intention is right to preserve sovereignty, and I support that intention to preserve sovereignty. But their strategy is unfortunately not the right one. Worse still, it is clear that for decades the United States has been pushing the regimes it wanted to bring down into the trap of confinement only in order to invade them in the end. American version of Machiavelli consists in forcing the enemy to become a caricature of himself to finally come and free it by force. We must therefore make no mistake about the objective. The aim must not be to fight globalization. It must be to allow its country to succeed better than others in the global competition. In Europe, it seems to me that Switzerland is making efforts, more efforts, for example, than any other country to maintain its unique civilization and democratic model. But how can we succeed in this global competition without taking the risk of witnessing the dissolution of a nation in globalization? That's the key point. The first condition is to know what we want to serve first. Is it civilization or is it the individual? Is it identity or is it individualism? If individualism dominates, then any nation with less power will dissolve in globalization to the benefit of a dominant power. That is what is happening to Europeans today. They forget their civilization, they only serve the individual, which is a short-term logic. They are becoming submissive to the United States. They accept to be gradually replaced by non-European people, ethnically by Africans, culturally by Muslims. But if civilization is the first aim, then it is possible to succeed in globalization while maintaining its independence. However, we must keep in mind that independence...
Но при этом мы должны осознавать, что независимость не может абсолютная, поэтому нужно принимать все то, что...
Not a problem if it is not less expensive for others than for you to challenge it. In trade, it is all a matter of balance. I believe that China and Japan show us that we can be effective players in globalization while preserving our civilization. Japan keeps its identity. It's a great economic power, but it has managed to keep its identity. It is proud of its history. It refuses humiliation through repentance, a disease that strikes Europeans. Japan keeps its identity. It refuses the replacement of population. In 2017, it granted asylum to only 27 non-Japanese, despite being one of UNHCR's major contributors. Japan prefers agreeing to the replacement of its population, which does not really matter in a world where robots and artificial intelligence will replace many occupations and human activities. China follows the same logic. It is one of the major players in globalization, but it does not want to lose its identity. Its communist ideal actually became an ideal of common good in the service of the Chinese empire, refusing individualism to become the dominant ideology. Capitalism is an accepted instrument because it is effective, but it must remain at the service of the common good and at the greatness of China. China, like Japan, does not accept the replacement of its population by overpopulation from other continents. In Japan and South Korea, honor, a traditional value, does not seem to have been achieved by Western utilitarianism. Elders continue to be respected. In China, President Xi Jinping sent a signal explaining that becoming a Western democracy is not China's intention and that China is determined to become a global player with its own political system. In Europe, it seems that Switzerland is making more effort than other countries to maintain its unique civilization and democratic model. This democracy, due to the referendum system, remains more connected to the people, which, for example, helps them to better resist against Islamization. Since the arrival of President Putin, Russia has also placed the preservation of its identity and its civilization as its primary objective, as the rejection of individualism which defeats nations. Russia has shown that it can resist American geopolitics and has proposed an ideological counter-model, the defense of the family, of the Christian values, and the rejection of the God-man ideology. But then comes the economic issue. Should we be in favor of free trade, free capitalism, or protectionism? In my opinion, the answer is way simpler than it seems. We must be pragmatic and make economic choices based on the common good, neither absolute liberalism nor absolute protectionism. That's exactly what Americans do. They pushed their economic opponents to total deregulation, but are the first to use protectionism when American interests are at stake. Generally, I think that we must be in favor of free trade of goods and capitals, and then, in a targeted, very pragmatic way, intervene and regulate if required for the best interest. It's a mistake to completely close oneself to the global economy. It is a form of laziness that opens the way to all the bad paths. When we close ourselves, we no longer question ourselves. Corruption, laziness, lack of competitiveness quickly triumph. The country eventually weakens, becoming a victory for others. The Soviet experience has shown this. Capitalism is not perfect, but no better economic system has yet been invented. It must simply remain a tool, not as an end in itself. The human being is made such a way that it needs emulation, competition in order to improve itself, to question itself. That's why I believe more in the free economy, in the so-called open economy, than in the protected economy. But that doesn't mean I let freedom be exercised everywhere. In some cases, letting external competitors get in is a blessing, kicking out systems that do not serve the general interest. However, if American pension funds want to buy a small Russian or a French company with high technological added value, then I do not agree. This is no longer a free economy, it is naivety. Because there is an American strategy to capture European technological creativity to serve its military-industrial complex. President Putin was right about taking things in hand again in 2000. Otherwise, a large part of the Russian hydrocarbon production system would have come under American control. I note that he began to become the target of Western media when he tackled some Russian oligarchs who wanted to sell off the country's national interest. Russia has managed to protect its natural resources. Today, it must adapt its economy to the globalization. Its high level of education and its very strong capacity for scientific creation can make it a leading actor in globalization. I believe that this is the new challenge for the Russian presidency. Having stopped the American geopolitical progress and preserved its strategic resources, it is the Russian economy that must be turned towards the new economy and new forms of industry. That means breaking this silly regime of Western sanction. There might be no transitional solution other than to move forward with Asia-Pacific by increasing investment in Asia and accepting more Asian investment in Russia. Thank you very much.
Большое спасибо. Очень важно, что прозвучала мысль, что нужен все-таки баланс между свободной экономикой открытой и протекционизмом, потому что как закрытая экономика плохо, так и совсем открытая тоже не очень хорошо. Мы на примере России это хорошо знаем. Слово предоставляется Оскару Фрейзингеру, вице-президенту партии «Швейцарская народная партия».
Thank you very much. Dear listeners, let me put forward here in that discussion a rather philosophical view on identity, culture and values. In those matters, Russia has a great role to play because it could maybe become the new Rome the world so strongly needs. The question is, shall we cut ourselves from our past to enter the competition with this runaway world, or shall we preserve the gleaming link between us and our history? Shall we cut the link to the emotional landscape of our childhood, or shall we stand to our roots, to our family, to everlasting links which show us the way, give our life a sense and a balance, and allow us to be part of a world which is not dominated by greed, search of power and competition? The conflict of our time is not between right or left, between socialism and capitalism, between one superpower or the other. It is about harmony or chaos, sense or absurdity. We have to choose between the slavery of materiality and the freedom of the spirit, which links us to our fathers, to our place on earth where we were born and which we call our homeland. We look for a guiding light into darkness, for a goal to approach, something which allows us to grow inside of us. We need a name beyond space and time we can tend to. Luckily, we are not gods, because if this would be the case, everything would already be achieved in ourselves and the process of inner growth would be impossible. But though we are not gods, we have a part of infinity in our soul which makes us free and incidentally links us to the universe. This spark in our soul makes us unique and links us at the same time to all other people to make us one. Nowadays, globalists try to create a world without any borders, limits, or frontiers. They promise us a world of absolute liberty, here and now, but doing so, they limit us with the material reality they declare absolute. Imposing on us a new dogma of morality, they want us to become an obedient flock of sheep they can abuse for their own interests. Pretending to free us, they want to cut our roots, though they are well aware of the fact that, like trees, uprooted men dry out and die. Accusing us of immobility, backwardness and nationalism, they want us to be open and tolerant for a future whose design makes me think of the Brave New World of Aldous Huxley. No, dear globalists, we don't want to recreate the past. We only want to honor the achievements of the previous generations by taking the burden of life from their shoulders to assume our duty with respect for their merits. Then we will pass this burden on to our children. We don't want to be modern nomads without bonds to whatsoever tradition. We don't want to be lost souls in the vanity of ever-changing, manipulated, insubstantial forms. We want a modernity respectful for the past upon which it has been built. Tradition, culture, value, structure, responsibility, and self-discipline are far too big concepts of the past. They are of universal reach. The living conservatism, which has led my path on earth, is based on the conviction that life has a sense and therefore becomes a destiny. Our life is not only the result of chance, coincidence, accident, or hazard. We just must have the will to accept that, the will to listen to the mysterious voice we can hear in the silence of our soul. But this will can only be considered free as long as we are able to transcend the material reality. We shall not refuse or negate it, but transcend it. We shall find the hidden message of the world. We shall learn to read the signs in the outer world and in our soul and create a harmony between them. That's why our heritage is important. That's why a historically grown community is important. Because it is a lasting trace of the human spirit. Because it's composed of all the voices of the people which lived before us and will live after us. because it's made of as many different experiences as there have been human beings on this world. Diversity is indispensable to us because it allows us to make a choice. To have a choice makes us free. But there is no choice without limits, without frontiers, which protect everyone's identity and the richness of the cultures coexisting on this planet. What globalism is proposing us instead is a life without no real choices, because the aim is to lead us to centralism, technocracy, and standardization. It's a freedom imprisoned in an invisible cage. The will to impose the same happiness for all doesn't create a paradise, but hell. The globalists want to restore a system where liberty is sought only in bread and games, like in the ancient Rome. They want to destroy all borders because they want us to be transparent and predictable. They want a faceless control over our lives. George Soros and his allies pretend to know what is good for us, what makes us happy. But their open society opens the doors of a dead world, enclosing the doors of our soul. It opens the doors of one unique, controlled, standardized world, and by doing that, it closes the doors of heaven. Heidegger's Gestell, a perfect construct born in the mad brain of man-gods, is trying to replace the organic growth of life by pure mathematics, thus deshumanizing our civilization. But who will set limits to the human brain if man is behaving like he was God himself? If man does not submit to the unwritten, invisible laws of Antigone, if he's the master of his own law, then barbarity returns because he won't resist the temptation to do everything he wants just because it's technically possible. The theory of gender is such an abstract construction. There are no men, no women, there is like the rainbow, a panel of possibilities in sexuality. The only problem is it's always the same who become pregnant. So it doesn't work really, for the moment. But maybe tomorrow we will be pregnant. The theory of gender I just told about is such an abstract construction, the submission of everything to money, the creation of weapons of mass destruction or lethal automatic weapons, the use of nanoparticles and microchips to obtain the global control of everybody's life, the digitalizing of all financial transactions, and so on. Beware the desperation of physical money. If there's no physical money left, then they will know everything about you. The slightest thing you're buying, they will know. And you are a transparent man, and you are controllable, and you are not longer free. Thus, the eradication of all limits will erase the last remnants of our privacy and freedom. The physical frontiers of the countries are the first step, and then it's the limits, the frontiers, which are protecting you and your private life, which is the aim. Because a human being who has nor outer nor inner limits is a slave that believes to be free. But his freedom is an illusion because he is erring in an invisible labyrinth that others have created for him instead of a prison. Feeling free because he can walk around. He has no reason to rebel or to search a way out. Deprived of the compass of spirituality, he'll act ever more like a robot, condemned to be isolated from the others and the world. Having lost his soul, he will be a stranger to himself. He will be like a withered leaf, considering this last dance in the wind as a movement of life and freedom. Dear listeners, if we don't want to be withered leaves erring in the void, we have to preserve our culture and our identity, which link us with our true nature and the infinity of the universe. And Switzerland is an example. We resist the Americans for 20 years now. We've tried to resist because it's a big country, we're a small country. They tried to destroy our financial place. We resist the United Europe because they want to impose us an automatic overtaking from the legal system. We are very isolated. And we have this direct democracy where every citizen is a king. But everybody in Switzerland is King Ludwig the 14th. So we are the sovereign. And that gives bad ideas to the people around because they begin to think about it and to say, why can't we decide for ourselves? Why everything is decided in Brussels or above our heads? And there is a small country that's in the middle of Europe, the heart of Europe, where people can decide for themselves what they want. They go 4 times a year and vote freely about every subject. That's the case because we have the slowest TVA, comment tu dis en anglais TVA? Tax on, voilà. We have 7%. Europe is on 15, 20%. Yes, because they can't heighten it up without a vote of the people. And that's all the time like that. They can't change one word in the constitution because the people must decide and so on. Direct democracy is a very good system because everybody feels responsible, because he is part of the decision making, is part of the governance, and he feels responsible. And when a decision has been taken by more than 50% of the people, then he has a great legitimacy. More than if some people from the above, top down, decide for you. So I make a little bit marketing for the Swiss democracy, and I hope that gives you some ideas for Russia. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to turn it over to the professor of politology and international relations, Mr. R.D. Girard.
It is both a joy and a curse to be on a panel where everybody actually shares the same Weltanschauung. So much of what I have to say will be a follow-up on Herr Freisinger's presentation and that of the previous two speakers. First of all, I want to say that Western civilization on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean shares certain common traits, which only indicates that the transatlantic cousins share the same civilizational and spiritual chromosomes. The first one is the loss of religious faith on a massive scale, which is greater in Europe than in the US, but in the US the collapse is in full swing. The second is the ruling elite's hostility toward all forms of solidarity or coherence of the majority population based on common ancestry and traditional culture. The third problem is the loss of a sense of place and history, particularly among the young. The fourth is rapid demographic decline of the majority population, and it goes hand in hand with 5, rampant third world, especially Islamic immigration. 6, the collapse of private and public manners and morals. Anything goes. Who are we to judge? The 7th would be imposition of diversity, multiculturalism, and sensitivity and other isms by despotic means. And 8, by no means least, the radical demonization and criminalization of any opposition to any of the above. If you express any doubt about the wisdom of Angela Merkel's immigration policy, you're a racist, a Nazi, and worthy to be taken out and shot. All of this started with the Western man's loss of religious impulse. In the Renaissance, it made a quantum leap in the Enlightenment, and it was nearly complete when the guns fell silent on the Western Front in November 1918. And everything else is just the sequel. Europe and the West were dead men walking. The result is that in today's Britain, France, and Germany, more people pray in mosques on Fridays than in churches on Sundays. But de-Christianization creates neurotic, addictive, unpleasant people, prone to excess and self-abuse of every kind. Young Westerners in particular, and I know because, by God, I've been spending too many years of my life teaching them, are estranged from their parents, ignorant of their culture. In fact, they're ignorant of everything, and ashamed of their history. They only know that they're brilliant and unique. The Westerner's loss of sense of place and history is facilitated by the emergence of a monstrous hyperstate in Europe and the obsession of full-spectrum global dominance by the United States. Now, these two mindsets, seemingly at odds, are two aspects of the same syndrome, two sides of the same coin. Both neoliberals and neoconservatives, both Euro fanatics and superstate advocates in Brussels and Boltons inside the Washington Beltway, share the same distaste for traditional cultures and societies, for naturally evolving real communities. Echoing the revolutionary dynamism and the historicist messianism common to both fascists and communists, our neoliberals and neoconservatives excel in what Michael Ledeen calls creative destruction as America's eternal mission. Now, the proponents of this view have staunch allies among Europe's cultural Marxists. They share the goal of establishing a universal institutional framework which denies the legitimacy of any naturally evolving community based on vertical, hierarchical, and biological structures. The end of the Cold War created the way for the realization of the Gramscian Long March by eradicating traditional structures capable of resistance. And global empire does destroy the remnants, and it contains the germ of another form of globalization, the counter-empire made possible by the demographic change within the West. The revolutionary character of this cultural Marxist project is revealed in the mantra of race, gender, sexuality, race, gender, sexuality, race, gender, There is no social science research in the Western world today devoid of race, gender, and sexuality. If you don't deal with these most important of all issues in the world, you don't get funded, you don't get appointed, you don't get tenure at your college. This has replaced the proletariat as both the oppressed underclass, hence the cult of non-white, non-male, non-heterosexual victimhood, and the capitalist as the white, male, heterosexual European. In other words, the proletarian is a one-legged Hispanic lesbian Muslim. And the capitalist is me and him and him. Now, cultural Marxism has found the dynamics of revolution in this tension between the deracinated immigrant and the rooted white heterosexual European Christian. And we know who is the enemy. As for demography, what they're doing is clear. They're conducting a war of extermination, and Europe is dying. If the current trends continue, within 1 century there will be no Europeans as we know them, in the old world or new, as members of coherent defined groups that share the language, culture, history, ancestors, and inhabit defined territories as compact majorities. And in the process of Euro destruction, immigration is an essential tool of revolutionary change. And this is where Russia provides the example to us all, because it resists to be postmodernized, multiculturalized, and turned into a degenerate shadow of its former self by being ashamed of its past, of its culture, and of its faith. By seeking to appease the newcomers in the name of diversity, the Western host countries only whet these aliens' appetites for more concessions from the degenerate baby boomers, ever more dependent on imported labor to keep them fed, clothed, washed, and medicated in the bobo's paradise without God. In all cases, the newcomers share the same contempt for what they perceive as a supine and degenerate host society. For the elites, the outcome, a multicultural melange, is preordained. I may be running out of time soon, so I will simply move to the question of whether a gigantic reversal can happen. Now, a Christian would say that a miracle can and God willing will happen because there is the Holy Spirit. But to a political scientist, the model of recovery frankly requires a catastrophic event. specifically a colossal, rapidly spreading global economic crisis that will delegitimize Western elites. The meltdown would have to be so rapid as to destroy any confidence in the ability of governments or bureaucratic structures in Brussels or anywhere else to offer relief. The Mogherinis of this world will be seen to have no clothes. A breakdown of the global economy would force millions of people to re-examine their lives and assumptions. And becoming painfully disillusioned of progress with capital P, they would rediscover the value of force, the value and force of tradition. The ensuing brutal struggle for diminishing resources would make them drop the neurotic becoming in favor of just being, surviving for Christ's sake. A global economic collapse would reaffirm the values of historical man in the teeth of his progressivist reduction to technology and intellect. Amidst collapsing political structures, all ideological propositions would be recognized as empty abstracts. Communities linked to their native soil and bonded by kinship, memory, language, faith, myth, feeling, love would be revived, and hostile alien getters would be dispersed and expelled. In diversity, the eyes of man would be lifted once again to heaven. In the meantime, many Western conservatives are discovering Russia as a natural ally for these very reasons. Because for a quarter of a century, Russia has been trying to re-articulate its goals and define its policies in terms of traditional national interests. And we see the result. It is being demonized, it is being accused of ultimately still being herself. The European Union is just a pliant tool of the hegemonistic globalist empire across the Atlantic, and Macron and Merkel are in the same position vis-à-vis Washington as Todor Zhivkov and Ulbricht and Honecker once had been vis-à-vis Leonid Brezhnev. Russia is not only the guarantee that the Russian people will survive, it is also a beacon of hope for the rest of us that with the darkness of post-civilizational, post-human, anti-West enveloping the West, that there is still hope. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you for this presentation. I'd like to turn it over to Bakit Tarabayev, who is a leader of a parliamentary faction from Kyrgyzstan. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, conference participants. I'm glad to be greeting you this afternoon. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers for inviting me, and of course, today's topic, sovereignty, identity, and protectionism as a new agenda of the global politics, is very, very topical. Very burning. We cannot look away from the global processes. We cannot stand aside and see how quickly the new digital technologies are spreading across the world. It would be another question whether we are going to be simple observers who will be just affected by the global processes, or whether we'll be consciously involved in them, develop ourselves, develop our economy, politics, while preserving our national identity and sovereignty. In the conditions of globalizations, we must learn to evaluate, to assess our own capabilities and not entrust our destiny to global players. I would like to note that globalizations runs on two routes. There are positive aspects of globalization, such as a great growth rate of direct investment, transfer of technologies, change in structure of industry, which improves the competitive qualities of company, the creation of global industries, which impacts the national economy and results in the growth of trade and changes in managerial processes and legal systems. Secondly, globalization has some negative consequences. traditions are weakened and the national interests are being undermined and languages suffer and the territorial integrity. There are certain attempts to rewrite history. And as a result of all these, we find ourselves in a global market, in a single information space, and cultures lose their faces, national borders get blurred, and national identity is fading, which creates the conditions for the global government to govern more and more people. The processes of globalizations affect the interests not only of the global players such as China and Russia, but also those of small developing countries such as Kyrgyzstan, which I represent here. Our country is a member, is a part of the integration processes that involve the creation of the Eurasian economic space. Back in 1998, we became a member of the WTO, and in this regard, for our country, with slightly over 6 million citizens, the following questions come in the foreground. What risks and uncertainties is globalization fraught with? How can we counter these risks? How can we preserve our economic sovereignty in the era of globalization? To what limit can we restrict our sovereignty by delegating our authority so that our country preserves its identity? What measures need to be adopted by various countries, in particular Kyrgyzstan, in order to preserve our production potential, our industry and agriculture, while being a member of the global community? In modern conditions, working together with Russia and other countries that are members of the Eurasian Economic Union, we must take advantage of the positive sides of globalizations. However, while seeking these outcomes, we should not take a step on the false, on the evil path to losing our face. We need to incorporate the positive aspects of globalizations without losing our mentality and national traditions. And I'm speaking about all countries of Eurasian Union. Today, Central Asia is a space which is influenced by two major powers, Russia and China, and we are at a crossroads of paths of people, goods, and months. And also such an organization as the Shanghai Organization of Cooperation, led by China, and the Chinese initiative One Belt, One Road, and this is another example of globalization. If I tell you that Kyrgyzstan in its trade, Russia used to hold first place. Today, China is the biggest trade partner for Kyrgyzstan. I would like to note that to small countries such as Kyrgyzstan, it is really important that larger players take care of our national interests. I believe we should not allow larger players to be guided by their interests only and look at us just as places as attachments that provide them with raw materials. I would like to note in conclusion that Kyrgyzstan is the only country in the post-Soviet space where the Russian language is an official language of the country. We have always felt support from Russia, and today we are really worried about the situation that has been created around Russia. I would like to tell you that our paths have a lot in common. Russia is our strategic partner. Thank you for your attention. Well, thank you very much. I'm turning it over to Zoran Radecic, who is a member of parliament in Serbia. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Allow me to first of all thank Mr. Konstantin Babkin and his colleagues from the party and the Russian Academy of Science for organizing this event. And here we have an opportunity to consider a very important question of what globalism is. To put it simply, we are talking about a very lengthy process whose goal is to put the entire world under its control in favor of certain centers of power. And the methods that are used to achieve this goal are very well thought over, they're very well developed, and they encompass a large range of activities, starting from propaganda and misinformation using mass media, which are controlled by the globalists, and color revolutions that would disrupt the social and economic fabric and political fabric of countries, and not only that are not only in the way of development of the respective countries, but also lead to their destruction. This model also requires that education and research institutes be destroyed, that armies be destroyed in some countries, and their special services. Without any resolution of the United Nations, it conducted brutal bombardments of a sovereign country for 180 days. They killed men, women, and children. They used weapons that is based on uranium. They killed our soldiers and our policemen. The outcome of this was that Kosovo and Metohija, which are parts of Serbia, they were occupied and became separated.
They brought to power the terrorists that are involved in drug trading and people trading, and they provide refuge to terrorists. And second, they destroyed Iraq and Libya, and they also sought to destroy the Republic of Syria, Arab Republic of Syria, and they could not reconcile themselves with the fact that Russia became a strong country, that it is pursuing sovereign policy, and that it respects international law and all the participants on the international arena, and that it is impossible to solve any important issue on the international issue without Russia. Therefore, in addition to everything that I've said, there is an information warfare waged against Russia, and also diplomatic war and also economic war. I would like to add several more words. In the 19th century, in London, in the capital of the UK, there were several terrorist attacks. And what the Brits said at that point in time, they accused Russia and Russians at that time. They didn't have any proofs or any evidence against the Russians. It was in the 19th century. Today, we are in the 21st century. And the British, they are accusing the Skripal case and Yulia. They do not provide any evidence. They do not have any evidence, but they do not say they don't have any evidence, but they just say that the Russians are to blame. Pin the blame on Russians. And they use absolutely stupid things like isolation of Russia by sanctions. Do they really want to thank Russia so much for its active struggle against terrorism at the international arena, so that they could hide the fact itself who harbors terrorists and who created terrorists? And to solve all these problems could be solved in active resistance to globalists, opposition to globalists, and active struggle in upholding our own values, but not somebody else's values. I'd like to give the floor to Andrei Kubikov. He is a member of the Dila party. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and frankly, I was not planning to speak before you today because somebody was here before me. You know that we also had quite an intensive roundtable in the session before this, and the volume of information, worrisome information about the condition of international affairs, the analytical assessments that were made, violations of the existing predictable rules of behavior at the international arena. It's only facts of erosion of the world order. It, you know, it was my conscience and my mind was overfilled, and it produced or generated even more questions than answers. And I began to think, to ponder over all these things, and the topic which I am actively developing, I was taking part in when we are preparing this session of the International Conservative Club. First of all, it sounded like a topic, a political topic. However, after I've heard a number of speakers, I would like to, however strange it may sound to you, to dwell on a different aspect of this issue. I share all the ideas that have been expressed so far. Meantime, I also would like to dwell on some other things, like Mr. Fraser, when he spoke to us. It was a sort of philosophical essay that he presented to us, and it poses very important principal issues. And the focal word in this, the word is identity, was the focal word in his presentation, and his it could be interpreted in a political sense, like identity of a country, identity of a nation, of certain community of people. However, identity of an individual, because the identity of a person is exactly what the struggle in today's world revolves around. And I agree with you, Mr. Frasinger. It's not a struggle between the left and the right. However, it is not a struggle in the traditional understanding. Contrary to that, I believe it's like a camouflage of the actual battle, and we have to be to face a false dilemma. If you uphold the traditional values, traditional marriage, marital relations, normal family, maternity, and the right to give birth and to educate and to bring up your own children, and so on, you identify yourselves with the right side forces. However, in most cases, the people who refer to themselves as the right people are banned, especially in the Anglo-Saxon countries. There is a purposeful regulation of economic relations, and free market becomes a cult for them, or glamorized with them, and it became apparent that it is imperfect, and in many issues and many problems of humanity, market cannot resolve. Otherwise, you are compelled either to accept this addition as an addition to your political right-wing orientation. You have to repudiate it and to join the left wing. And what do we see? The leftist camp. This is not the Social Democrats, European kind of, or Euro-communist kind of Democrats that we observed in the 60s and 70s last century, but these are the leftist forces that derive from the previous revolution, of post-modernity revolution. It's post-modernity leftists, and what matters for them is not the rights of workers or protection from the oppressors, but what matters for them it's the sexual minorities and protection of I'm not going to be politically correct, of the sexual perverts. I do not want to be politically correct. Protection of deviant the behavior, and sometimes my hair stands on end when I listen to the political debates somewhere in the Netherlands when they discuss the possibility their sexual relations with their small children. That is with understanding that a parent will not do harm to his child even in this sexual relation. But so I'm telling you what, it's whatever. And this is abnormal. This is a clear-cut manifestation of abnormality, and this is the human nature, preparation of human nature. And otherwise, if you share the position of social justice and protection of various abused groups, you have to protect these groups, protect their interests. In this case, you should never say that you are protecting cultural values or national values, that you're upholding the values of your nation, that you're protecting the values of traditional family. You should not even try to do that. And this is right, and the leftists, they're against one another. And this is how traditionally we understand the left and the right-wing agendas. This is a struggle for a man, for a human being, and for the essence of man. And the essence of man today is a kind of microcosm, which is a direct link with the infinity. I agree with that, and it was mentioned in traditional religions. That is, you take the religions which are based on the Old Testament. Man was created after the image of God, and what do you mean, the image of God? And Freisinger said, we're not gods, otherwise we have solved the problems. Yeah, it's true. However, a person that was created after the image of God, he must be distinct and different from anything other that exists on this planet Earth. And that is the freedom of will, freedom of opportunities to create, to be creative, because we are created after the image of the Creator. So we have to be creative. And this is why it is not comfortable to lead a life that has not put any objectives, any tasks of this kind before yourself that could only be acquired through the artificial way of narcotics, and or probably people are become game maniacs. They can believe that they live in the paradise without God. As one of the speakers said in the previous session, that in the West they build paradise without God. But this is quite a right formulation. Alexander Rorar had to say that the West with the society without God, or we are in the center of a struggle between the good and the evil. And this is a logical kind of struggle. This is a struggle of man to remain man, to still be man, and with pride carry out his mission. Probably I use a lot of pathos when I speak about that, but this is where the magnitude of man manifests itself. And should you deprive man of that, the man will degrade, and that's it. And we'll have to deal with reverse evolution. We'll have to deal with a person who becomes, as the English say, human cattle. If they say that is thinking cattle or human cattle, I believe this is what we have to think about. This is what brings us together, in political sense, because the struggle is conducted not only on the level of ideas, but also the political decisions and actions and actual collisions of forces, up to the saber rattling, and this is a permeating agenda for identity of man, and it is laid in the foundation of self-identity of the political force, self-determination of the political forces that have assembled at this round table. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Andrei Borisovich. I want to give the floor to Mr. Khomyakov, head of the People's Cathedral movement. I will have to look at my notes, not because I don't know what to speak about, but in order to sort of lose some time, not lose time, waste time. Speaking about conservatism, And this word was quite seriously discredited in the past 100 to 150 years. The people who promote various globalist projects, it could be Marxists, it could be today's globalists, but conservatism does not mean retrogression. We have to emphasize that. It's one of the slogans of our movement had to say that is future with resting on eternity. That is, we rest on that, and we look into the future, not in the past, and we have to rely on the past, on the eternity, and the common problems that we have to share is it was mentioned several times, is the issue of globalization. There are several objective prerequisites for globalization, which is several crises, resources, demographic and population growth, and ecological, environmental, and there could be only two solutions, as many people believe. It's either people will have to change their approach to life and economy, their approach to their understanding of the world. If they change that, and they will balance their requirements, which is equally important in today's world, and then they will survive. Or the other way out, which globalists propose, is concentration of all the world resources in the hands of a small group of people of the transnational structures. And they will actually represent the human elite. And as one of the tools to achieve that purpose is cultural expansion, ideological expansion, which are very important, expansion of values, and if the country accepts them. And if you had in Russia this example in the 1990s, it actually meant a forfeiture of your own ideological sovereignty, which immediately entailed forfeiture of cultural sovereignty, economic sovereignty, and political sovereignty. And this is an overwhelming trend, and we are trying to get out of that box, so to say, but it's a long way to go yet. And one of the tools in this area is creation of the controlled chaos and the territory of the planet. When I speak about struggle against terrorism, we have to remember, bear in mind, that it didn't arise or emerge by itself, and Wahhabism, it's like it's like a 19th or 18th century, because he was very closely working with the British intelligence, and it's well known, al-Bahan, and it is well known that a whole number of support of extremist movements was conducted by the West, including the Chechen wars, and this movement took birth in Afghanistan. That was a go-between between the suppliers of arms and narcotics, and they were buying the most sophisticated weapon systems, circumventing the Congress, and so all the terrorist organizations, one way or the other, they're working at creating the world chaos, and the way out will be proposed to man, that is to destroy the sort of statehood and to pass over all the power to a group of competent international specialists. That's exactly what the people propose. They try to push the world to this solution. There is a very interesting document. It was a Communist Manifest 2000, Communist Manifest 2000. You have a look at it. One of our religious authorities, old Delia, he called it New Testament by the Satan, and it was a humanistic, in many humanistic expressions, and it wound up with a call for a global world, which I told you about. Otherwise, it proposes a future without national culture, no identity, no traditional religions. Otherwise, they call it will be Antichrist. That's, we have to remember that, and the Muslims also understand what I mean. And it's a multipolar world, which they try to erode or destroy the globalist process. So in Russia, it goes on quite different, because the traditional thinking of Russia and the civilization code is quite conservative. It's aimed at traditional values, but many people who believe today that that the conservatives are indeed. But here I agree with you. The thing is that our ruling party, the Unified Russia, a great layer of these people, a tier, is the conservatives who believe liberalism, and conservatives that identify one with the other, and they take some Anglo-Saxon echoes, and it's Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and the others who are paragons for them, and this is quite I said it is something like a square round, this kind of thing, and they are trying to make a simple thing alongside with traditional values, conservative values, that is a strong state and strong family and moral values, whatever they add to it, such as market economy and the free press and complete freedom of all liberties and whatever, and repudiation of any social programs. You have to understand that not everyone who calls himself a conservative is indeed a conservative. I want to draw your attention to this. I want to explain it all to our foreign colleagues who are present here. At our day session, which is quite correct, there is a formation of what has to be formed. It's an alliance of conservative forces in Europe, or unified front of conservative forces in Europe. We'll look at very things differently. But in contrast to globalism, red globalism, current globalism, any color globalism, conservatism is nation-colored, and it is based on national values, and you cannot bring Italian values and identify with the Russian values or Serb values with the German values. You will never succeed in that, but there are certain provisions on which you can set up this kind of a movement. We were trying to form the alliance of the people who have completely different convictions, from anarchists to communists. Meantime, we found the common subjects and common topics based on which they could be united.
This is what I want to offer to suggest that we take on. We need to set up a conservative alliance and put in its foundation 10 to 12 concepts that would be acceptable to everybody. The 10 commandments, if you will. I do not want to offer a blasphemy, but the right to sovereignty, the right of people to be itself in terms of its culture and values without anything foreign, and rejection of the policy of population replacement with migrants, which would be very important, the rejection of postmodernism and globalism as anti-Christian teaching, and I think that traditional religions will all support that. And finally, the primate of the priority of national over international. So if it's not there, then no sovereignty would be possible. So I think that these 10 simple concepts, and I hope my colleagues would add or suggest their ideas along these lines. Without such concepts, we'll be eaten alive, all of us. Thank you. Well, indeed, these ideas are very important, because if all things equal, we are talking about we are all different, but at the same time we can live together, and we have been living together for a long time. And I think we have people from more than one continent here, or from the single continent of Eurasia. And the core idea that we are trying to promote is the that coexistence with mutual respect to each other's culture and cultural values. And in economics, we can also find interesting solutions, such as regional economic unions or alliances characterized by mutual respect. And this can be put in the foundation of trade alliances or any other joint economic projects that can be implemented. So I believe that the very existence of a conservative alliance as an intellectual platform that can bring us together should somehow set the wheels in motion and add some dynamics to the process. So Who would like to offer their comments? Please limit yourselves to about 2 minutes. Be brief. Well, 2 minutes is a very short time. Well, it would be difficult to say anything meaningful, but I'll try to offer you some concepts. Since I'm not a public person, my name is Fyodor Gryzunov. I am a professor from the Department of Management Technologies from the Institute of Mathematics, and I am also a public activist. I'm a coordinator of the Research School for Economic Problems. Back in 2012, 5 PhDs, 5 doctors habilitatis wrote a book, and we sent that book to the government, but it was left without much attention. So I wanted to voice a number of ideas that would further the concepts offered in our work. So sovereignty, of course, is defined first of all by the economic elements, the level of economic development. For instance, a good example would be China. Since 1991, China has increased its GDP more than 20-fold, becoming the first economy in the world. And since 2011, the size of the Chinese economy exceeded that of the United States, and in a decade, China will exceed, will have a greater financial power than the United States, and that's why they do not fool with it. But you know, the annual growth rate of the Russian economy over the last 10 years averaged 1.1%, but other countries grow at 3 to 4% every year. So we have accumulated 26 years of lagging behind. So let me turn to the causes of this lagging behind. I understand it would be impossible. I'll just name the causes and offer very short comments. The first would be the disruption and destruction of the state, of the mechanisms by which the government could govern the economy. Now everybody is concerned with privatizing and taking chunks of the state budget, although the role of the government should be to plan and motivate the progress and development of the economy. So the Soviet governance mechanisms have been destroyed and no new mechanisms have been put in place. So this is the primary cause of stagnation. A second cause would be the outdated liberal economic model. Recently, Dvorkovich, a member of our government, speaking at an economic academy, covered himself with shame by saying that everything is just fine, and which caused some laughs in the audience because the country is not all right. And he suggested that the free market will regulate everything. So, in fact, this idea is 300 years old and first offered by Adam Smith. And it is quite out of line with the state of modern world. And the modern economies are much larger and much more complicated, and those ideas will never work in contemporary environment. For comparison, I can tell you that the Economist's chief editor, even in the US, out of the SP 500, 450 are controlled directly or indirectly by the government. And here's liberal economy for you. Then the third reason would be the incompetence of certain members of government, such as Mr. Dvorkovich. He has a master's degree. He has never managed a team of street sweepers, and now he's in charge. He's been put in charge of the Russian economy. So we get back to our topic. So getting back to our topic, we are not discussing Mr. Dvorkovich here. So, preservation of our sovereignty depends on the state of economy, and President Putin said that unless we are able to grow at a rate, if we are not able to eliminate the lagging behind, then our prospects would not be bright, would be quite dire. That's the idea I wanted to communicate here. Not only do we need a new economic model, we need a new economic mechanism to govern the economy and to direct it in the right way and ensure our economic sovereignty. Thank you. Well, please, 2 or 3 minutes, no more. Valery. Well, the globalization leads to losses of national sovereignties and national traits and puts us under the feet of the global oligarchy. And globalization also strangles competition and limits our worldview, makes it very limited. And this contradiction can be resolved by a new paradigm relying on trialectics rather than dialectics. Trialectics is harmonious synthesis of the opposites. Globalization can be identified. What we need to replace globalization with sovereign globalization. Synthesis is always more productive than struggle of the opposites, and we need to use the positive traits of globalization, but use them in the framework of sovereign states and sovereign economies. In particular, for Russia, sovereign globalization would eliminate the opposition between Russia and the rest of the world. And this would require the involvement of researchers and economic players from Russia into the global context. We need to find a reasonable compromise between globalization and protectionism. A sharp transition that occurred in the 90s led to a destruction of the Russian industry. Thank you very much. Our time is running up. Do you have any questions to the presenters? There doesn't seem to be any questions. We have exhausted our topic. Thank you very much, and all the best to you.